Community has launched the campaign to try and counter the extremists.
Now speaking out to denounce terror and extremism.
30,000 people formed a human chain in the south this afternoon in the name of peace.
We're asking if religious intolerance is on the rise.
We believe that religious freedom is a fundamental human right.
Giving a message that Islam is a religion of peace.
We must all endeavor to spread love and a sense of community.
In the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful, may the peace and blessings of Almighty God be upon you. Welcome to this, the 22nd edition of Press Point, the current affairs show which looks at Islam in light of current affairs around the world and tries to provide some real answers to some of the burning questions. So today we're looking at movements around the world, in Germany, in France, in the UK, in America, and in many places around the world, which are anti-Islamic movements and are looking to tackle the issues of extremism and fundamentalism, but at their heart are anti-Islamic. And we're looking to work out, why are these movements growing at the moment? What are they responding to? In addition, how should we respond to them? Not only Muslims, but also Western liberal democracies. How should they respond to arguably extremist ideologies coming against Islam, and almost a meeting of extremism within these nations? So how do we best respond, and also what's the future look like? What are some of the solutions and how can we move forwards? So that's today's show. As ever, I'm joined by my very good friend and brother, Farooq Mahmood.
Assalamu alaikum, Brother Jonathan. Thank you very much indeed. Of course, you've summed it all up as to what the plan is today. I'll just simply request that could you please also share with us your views through emails or Twitter. You can send us your emails to presspoint@mt.tv. You can send us your tweets, but please use the hashtag PressPointMTA. It's always easy to pick those tweets with that sort of mark as hashtag PressPointMTA. Tell us, do you think, is the gap between West and Islam widening? If it is, how can we bridge that gap?
Now, Farooq, we're also very blessed to have the Emir, the President of the UK Ahmadiyya Muslim community, Mr. Rafiq Hayat. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah for joining us today, Mir Sahib. Jazakallah. So, and we also have a number of Skype guests who we're going to come to individually, so we'll be with them very shortly. We have 4 online, so we'll wait until we go to them. So, Brother Farooq, let's start with part 1. So we know that for part 1 we want to look at, are Islam and the West compatible? Now, in particular, in fact, we want to look at the rise of anti-Islamic elements around the world, the movements around the world. So we mentioned briefly about these. Let's start with some of the headlines that we've seen, for example.
Look at the headlines perhaps very quickly and we'll skim through them. First of all, this story on Quds says the anti-Islamic far right is spreading in Europe and going mainstream. And looking at the details there, of course, Pegida is one of the walks, I think, called. These guys, as an organisation, Pegida, they've gathered support around, starting in Vienna in Austria, and then, of course, in Germany as well. But recently, we've heard that it's slightly fizzled out, but let's hope it is fizzling out for good. Then we have a story again on Observer, the opinion section of that, with 3 murders in Chapel Hill, America, America must confront anti-Muslim rhetoric. Now that is the other side of the story, of course. What's happening is that rise against Muslims and the sentiment is becoming more heated, and as a result 3 innocent civilians in America who were Muslims, but Americans very importantly, got killed in America only a few days back. And then lastly, for the time being, we have on Washington Post just a story, a bar chart which gives us an idea as to what's happened over the years. Clearly, the anti-Muslim crimes in America have risen drastically ever since 2001. So 2001 was a defining moment in the history of the current world, to be honest. Before 2001, about 20 to 30 incidents will take place per year against Muslims. Now, since 2001, it's gone up to between 100 and 150. So about 5 to 6 times more has happened ever since. So that probably sets the scene pretty well for us to discuss further.
Very much, very much. Just to yourself, Amir Sahib, to yourself, we've seen this movement that Brother Farooq mentioned growing within Germany, and there was 25,000 people that were on a march in Dresden, and we've seen also 3 young Muslim students killed in America recently by their neighbour. So there seems to be a rise of anti-Islamic sentiment taking place at the moment. Why do you think, particularly looking at the rise of the German march movement, why do you think this is happening now?
You see, I think what has happened is that we, after the Second World War, the governments were able to suppress the right wing in most of the Western countries. But slowly, as we proceed in time and other issues, more important issues, are facing the world, the far right is now taking form again. We've seen that not only in Germany, but we've seen that with Le Pen in France, and also to some extent with the English League, the BNP, and now some of them are also involved with UKIP, although UKIP in itself is not a racist organization, but it has been infiltrated by some of these right-wing activists. So yes, I think Islam has become an excuse for these organizations to take something which is current and contemporary and make it into something which the media wants, and therefore they're taking advantage of the situation. These people in a different time would have been going for other things. They may be anti-Semitic, or there may be other reasons why they would start campaigning against other issues. Yes. But currently, because Islam is very controversial, therefore they have taken that on the bandwagon.
Can I put a quote to you as well, Mir Sahib? So this is some of the sort of thinking behind the march movement. One of the, it's not actually one of the marchers, but it's someone who's connected, whose name is Michael Prutz, and he's the leader of an organization known as Arms for the Kurdish People's Protection Units. So they're out on the streets in Germany and they're raising money to combat ISIS. So he says, we feel it's time to stop being pacifist about the threat of Islamic fundamentalism and the connection between the Middle East and Germany. So if we substitute the Middle East and the UK, is he right? Is it time to stop being pacifist about the threat of Islamic fundamentalism, do you think?
Yes, I think to some extent we have to be very careful, because there is no doubt that Islamic fundamentalism is rising throughout Europe. We've seen shades of it recently in France. We've had the 7/7 in the UK, and recently the Lee Rigby murders. But I think the problem is that Islam is being tainted by some of these fundamentalists who are not truly following Islam. These are political organizations who have taken in the name of Islam and are trying to project themselves. If you look carefully at what happened with Lee Rigby, the two people who were involved with them, they were Muslim converts. They found that by using the name of Islam, they would get more publicity. And then this recent case of this young man who was a Jehovah's Witness who converted to Islam, again, these are extremist people. They're criminals who are using the name of Islam because they know that if they use the name of Islam, they will get more publicity. Now, if he did it as Jehovah's Witness, nobody would take any care of it. They would be just a common criminal. But as soon as you add the name Islam to it, suddenly the whole thing changes. And unfortunately, this is what is happening, that we are getting some of this. Having said that, some of the young Muslims are also being radicalized, and that is where the danger lies. We have to be very careful, because with social media now, you know, ISIS and these organizations, they are very media savvy, and they're using the media to their advantage by going into the homes of youngsters who are naive and impressionable, and they tap into their naivety and exploit it.
But I want, another question. I mean, we know Farooq Sahib that February the 28th, I believe, will be not to publicise it as such, but in fact this march movement, anti-Islamic march movement, from our reading, is doing a march in Newcastle on February the 28th. So it's coming here to the UK. What if you know, a hypothetical situation, if you were able to address the march, those people that had come out on the streets in Newcastle, and they were there because they felt that Islam was in some way threatening their town, what would you say to them?
I think I would say the same thing that Hazur actually mentioned on LBC recently. You know, firstly, I think the whole picture of Islam has been corrupted. Islam in itself means peace. And really, Muslims should be loyal citizens of the country they live in. And then Hazur has raised the issue that fundamentalism is growing. And he has proposed some solutions to this fundamentalism. He said that one, Muslims should be totally transparent, so that, you know, the government and the authorities should be able to go into their mosques and be able to see what is being preached within these mosques. Then he said that there is a legitimate right for people to protest. Even the Iraq war, there was 2 million people who came out in the streets. That was their legitimate right. So when Muslims are under attack, they also have a legitimate right to put their point of view. But use the democratic process, which is use your members of parliament, use bodies and authorities which will promote your views and bring change from within. Not go out in the street with arms and start killing people. That is not the solution.
So very strong solution from Mr. Hayat in the UK. Connecting with what you've said, Amir, we know that there's been these recent tragic murders in the USA. So one of our guests is from the USA, very active online voice, is Mr. Fahim Yunus. So let's go to Mr. Yunus now. Assalamu alaikum, Fahim Sahab, are you with us?
Wa alaikum assalam, Jonathan. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Jazakallah for joining us. Mr. Yunus, we've seen the recent killings of 3 Muslim students in the USA. We know that this was committed by their neighbour, Mr. Hicks. He himself was in fact motivated by an anti-theist sentiment. So his motivation was that he found religious or Islam very threatening on his doorstep. I'm paraphrasing almost. How has this affected thinking or the widespread debate within America, the killing of these 3 young Muslims?
I think people need to understand America is a country of 300 million people and 300 million guns. The guns are rampant in our society. There's a Second Amendment in our Constitution that allows citizens to keep and bear arms. At the same time, over the past few decades, if you look at all the gun violence in America, much of that has happened in schools, at workplace. 75% of the time, every gun violence was linked in the end to a white, disgruntled man. Yet, when gun violence happens, no one goes out and asks for every white man to apologize for that. That is the line which most Muslims are now taking in USA. That why is it, just like Amir Saab UK was saying, why is it that every time there's a murder committed by a Muslim, his faith is linked? Why can't a Muslim also be suffering from PTSD? Why can't a Muslim also be a schizophrenic? So essentially that is the line which more and more people are now drawing, and I think it is gaining traction as well. In a free and open society, there is always room for that kind of voice. And what is heartening, I understand there's a lot of anti-Muslim sentiment in America today. I agree with that. But there are 2 Americas, Jonathan. There is a cultural America from where some of this sentiment emerges. And then there is a constitutional America. And that is an extremely beautiful America where the laws of the land will uphold the individual freedoms. And if you look at Mr. Hicks, he's probably going to spend his life in prison, if not death penalty, which is applicable in North Carolina. If you look at all those anti-Muslim violent crimes, as compared to my birthplace, Pakistan, where these killers kill with impunity and then go out and give sermons in the mosques, over here in America, these killers are then put in jail and they serve their time. So that is extremely heartening to see that the law of the land is on our side.
And there's a strong connection between gun laws and the use of guns and this recent incident. But I think also there's a wider theme, arguably, which and from this article, which is from The Observer, the opinion. It's an opinion blog and it's written by Rabia Chowdhury. Then she cites an example of a number of very well-known American politicians who are speaking very strongly against Islam. One of these is a Republican candidate. His name is Bobby Jindal. Not looking necessarily to give airtime to him, but I think it's important that we get a sense of the American debate. So if I were to read just some of the things that he said, he recently said that the immigration of Muslims to the US is an invasion, it's colonization, and he warned of the imposition of Sharia law resulting in areas in which only Muslims will have control. Is that accurate? Do you feel that as an American, that this is a reality within America at the moment? And can this help to explain why people like Mr. Hicks are committing these atrocities?
Well, this is a great point that you brought up. I didn't know you were going to talk about Bobby Jindal. A 13-year-old boy from the Ahmadiyya Muslim community USA, Jonathan, responded to Bobby Jindal and wrote a letter to editor and got published, that he's just as American as Bobby Jindal or anybody else. The point I'm making, I think it's time for that microsurgery where there is a tumor in the brain of Islam. We know these extremists are real. And Ahmadiyya Muslim community, we, by the grace of Allah, under the leadership of Khilafat, we're in a very unique situation. We need to understand that. We can go out and call out the Maududian philosophy like Khalifatul Masih Rabi has done in Murder in the Name of Allah, and be very clear in our position that we are that voice within the world of Islam for over a century that has stood for loyalty wherever you live, that has stood up for separation of church and state, that has given women their rights. So this is a very interesting dichotomy. I really believe this is an opportunity for every Ahmadi on the globe to draw that distinction and not shy away. You know, Masih Madal.
I see, yeah. Okay, Mr. Yunus, thank you very much. I'm maybe going to come back to you later because you mentioned the concept of a cancer. People in the US have actually called Islam a cancer that's growing within the US. So maybe we can come back and we can deal with that really very perhaps offensive speech, but also an important comment which has been made. Before we do, let's now come back to the studio. It's time for part two, I think, Brother Farooq, isn't it? Which is really, we've looked at it, given sort of an overview of these anti-Islamic sentiment. We've understood it a little bit. Now we want to go into a bit more detail and look at how some of the commentary has responded to it as well. But before we do, let's go to a video, to get a sense of some of the wider context and some of the ideas that are coming forwards, which are forming part of this conversation at the moment. So let's go to the video now.
I think that there's two sides to all stories, and I think that we're possibly seeing the aggressive front, I suppose you would say, from the side of Islam at present. I'm sure, much like Christianity and all religions, there are two sides. There's a good group and there's a bad group of all parties, and currently we're seeing the minority bad group of Islam.
Well, I think some media obviously isn't very bipartisan. It comes across quite like some stuff obviously has an agenda, and I think it's up to people whether they believe that agenda or not. That's my personal opinion. So when I read something that is like blatantly misrepresentative, I kind of ignore it. But I imagine that some people might look at something and think, oh, well, maybe that's a story that I didn't know, and take it further than it is. And that is misrepresentation.
Islam is the religion of moderation, and that's how it's always been. And I think, it's up to Muslims to make it compatible. Do everything in moderation. It's a religion of peace, like surrender.
I think any religion, not only Islam, any religion is come to the West. It's a free society, and everyone is allowed to worship what they believe, and they should stand for that. And everyone should live in peace.
The problem is that the media say a lot of lies about Islam.
I think it's just because people are afraid of the different culture and the different way of life, and they don't know how to deal with that.
I think there's so much bad feelings towards Islam in the Western countries because of the attacks. These are just single events, and those single events get projected onto the religion Islam in general, and it's a generalization of a few extremists.
Most of the people working in the media are also anti-Islam, and I think they exaggerate a lot.
It's hard to know what's really true. It's hard to know if there is a lot of anti-Islamic sentiment or if it's just the way it's portrayed in the media. So, unfortunately, what's coming in the media is not real positive, and that will obviously influence people's perspective.
I don't know if there is anti-Muslim sentiment in a broad sense. I think for many people it's lack of familiarity and lack of knowledge of people from different parts of the world and people who have different religions and act and talk differently.
It's probably a bit biased. You've got, unfortunately, some of the wars going on now in Iraq and Afghanistan, and so there's going to be a natural bias against what would be perceived as enemy. which is unfortunate, but that's kind of the way it is.
Yeah, I think probably it is biased and anti-Muslim, because mostly what we hear is the negative stuff, right? And because most of us are not familiar with Islam, we don't hear the other side. So I think by nature, media coverage and journalists probably don't have the balance that you'd like to see.
It's a really useful insight into what some of the members of the public are thinking about whether anti-Islamic sentiment and Islamophobia are on the rise. Let's get back into the articles. Farooq, what's important on the web?
Before I start, I think just to comment on what we just heard, I mean, from Canada, UK and Germany, I think people are very balanced in the view. The general public is very different to what we see in the media. So media is not doing justice, apparently. That's what I would say for a start. Looking at this story here, which is from Wall Street Journal, it says Immigration and Islam. Europe's crisis of faith. France and the rest of Western Europe have never honestly confronted the issues raised by Muslim immigration. So they have asked a question whether immigration is a reason why it's happened. They've given some numbers as well, that 20 million Muslims live in Europe. 8% of French people are Muslims. 5% of UK people, British people are Muslims, and 5% of Germans are Muslims. Amisab, do you think immigration is a real issue, or something else is brewing under the surface, which is a bigger problem than immigration itself?
I do not think immigration is an issue at all. Okay. I think if you look at Europe, you'll find that after the Second World War, there was a lot of migration from the Middle East, from Asia, into Europe. And you know, there's a large Turkish community in Germany, for instance. There's a very large North African community in France. And here in the UK, because our colonies were India, Pakistan, and some of the Arab countries, we had a lot of immigration from those countries. And in the period between the Second World War and now, everyone's lived in peace and harmony. The problem actually starts after we went and created chaos in the Middle East. When we went and attacked Iraq against the advice of the people of this country, 2 million people came out against the war in Iraq. But our politicians, for whatever reason, decided that they wanted to go and win. Yes. And that is where the problem starts. Now, even now, in these countries, 99% of the Muslims want to live in peace and harmony with the society. There's a very small fundamentalist movement that is actually, they're the ones who are causing the problems. And it has got nothing to do with immigration. Yes. It is individuals who are creating chaos.
Yes, sir. To ask, to play devil's advocate and to be the voice of let's say the English Defence League, if I may, not myself personally, but to put their views out there, then they would say that we live in Luton, we live in Leicester, we live in Bradford, we live in Tower Hamlets, and the places they used to be white British communities, they've lost that now, and because of immigration, and particularly they feel that maybe immigration from Muslim world, then no longer do they feel at home in their communities, and so the only thing that they can do is to turn against Islam, vote against immigration, and to be part of this anti-Islamic movement. What would you say to them?
I would say I came to this country 50 years ago. And when I came, this was primarily, London was an indigenous population. And over the last 50 years, we have had influx from all around the world. And we have a very multicultural, multi-religious, and a very cosmopolitan London. And London has been enriched by the people coming here. They brought their cultures, they brought their traditions. And as a result, London has become one of the most tolerant cities in the world. If after 7/7, whilst in America and other countries there was a huge reaction, in London there was peace. And you've heard some of the comments earlier of the people out on the streets. They do understand. They do distinguish, although the media is trying to play it up, that it's all the fault of Islam. They understand that this is not what Islam stands for. They are more knowledgeable than perhaps some of our journalists, or maybe our journalists are being mischievous. They want to create a fear in the society. And of course there will be a right-wing element who are not as well educated, who will be tainted by this, and they will have other prejudices. Those people, as I mentioned earlier, if it wasn't Islam, it would have been something else. So it is nothing to do with Islam. It just happens that at the moment the name of Islam has been tainted, and therefore that has become a problem.
So we have also online with us from France, Mr. Asif Arif. Assalamu, can you hear me, sir? Arif Saib, can you hear me at all? Perhaps we missed him.
Person that we have in line. We have
Yes.
a few guests. So
Yes.
If you're happy, for example, pose, or let me start off with this particular question that I was thinking for the counterpart of Mr. Hayat, the respected counterpart in Germany, the head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in Germany. Are you online with us? Assalamu alaikum, respected Mir Sahib, Germany.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Amir Sahib, you will have heard from the conversations and the guidance given by the president of the UK community. We're talking about Islam and anti-Islamic movements. We've seen recent marches in your country, in Dresden, 25,000 people on the streets, marching against Islam, as they say. I have an image in front of me. I'm not sure if you have it at home, but it's an image of a German lady, a German man. They have a flag and they have 3 words written on it. You'll help me if I mispronounce these words, God willing. It says Heimat, Freiheit, and Tradition. And according to my translation, this is homeland, freedom, tradition. So, and what they feel is that they need to go on the streets and they need to put this message out there because they feel that these 3 values are under attack because of Islam in Germany. What would you say to that?
I agree with these slogans, and I could, use the same slogans on behalf of Islam. The point is, that those people who are addressing these demonstrations, they have no experience at all with Muslims. Especially this Pegida is taking place in areas of Germany, in the east part of Germany, where we have a very, very small Muslim minority living. So, most of the people over there, they have no contact with Muslims. So, certain elements are taking over the processions and they are agitating against Islam. They are professional Islamophobical, groups. They work in a professional way against it. For example, if you see Leipzig, in the moment we are building a mosque in Leipzig, there is opposition, but we have many groups who are in favor of a colorful society. In Leipzig we had 4,000 Pegida members, and at the same time we had about 16,000 members who were demonstrating against. I think it is absolutely, overlooked that 20,000 people on the road against Islam is nothing. It is a small number and they will not be able to continue with these demonstrations. Already the figures are going down. It is a typical type of politics which is being made over there. We see on the other hand many other positive elements. So I think it is a number of time to overcome these difficulties.
So just back to this issue again of just because we're going to come to positives and definitely we want the positives, but also just to maybe to try to understand Pegida a little bit more. They go back and they say before 9/11 Germany was used as a hub for the 9/11 attacks. You had the Hamburg cell of the terrorists who were harbouring within Germany. And then to go forwards to now, looking at the marches, we've got an LA Times blog, and it says Germany walks a fine line amid rising anti-Muslim sentiment. And to give you a quote of some of the types of commentary that's coming forwards, it's very strong. It's essentially saying that the values which Islam holds are contrary to the values of Germany. And that also at the moment there is a threat that's coming from the Middle East and from ISIS and from Islamic Middle Eastern extremism, and that this is being brought in through immigration, through Lebanon, through Syria. They say Germany had the highest asylum applications in the world last year, and Germany is now becoming a hotbed for Islamic extremism. Are they right in that view?
But again, I have to tell you that we have, since the incident of Paris, we have a different, issue in the press, in the media, which is by some people, especially by the foreign press, overlooked. Mrs. Merkel, he made it very, very clear. She said, Islam belongs to Germany. Then secondly, she said, 95 or 98, or let's not discuss about this figure, of the Muslims are peaceful Muslims. And we have to defend them. They have nothing to do with these attacks. And then the third issue which she mentioned, she said, but I expect from the Islamic scholars and religious authorities that they explain to us why Islamic sources, why Holy Quran, for example, can so much be misused by these people, that we get these wrong impressions. Nowadays, when you check the magazines, the newspapers, we see a different, reception. We see that, they say there is Islam and there is extremism, and we cannot mix it. Of course, still there are some elements they don't want to take this differentiated look. But those intelligentsia, and when you see the good newspapers like FAZ, Zeit, those newspapers who have a certain reputation, they discuss the matter in a different way. For example, in the Parliament of Hessen, we had recently a hearing of expertise concerning radicalism of Jews. And every speaker over there were making this matter clear. Islam is one thing and extremism is the other thing. We have extremism in every religion. We had it before. Christianity, Buddhism, and so on and so forth.
You unpack that and you remove that, and then you separate the Islam from the extremism. So, Ms. Sabjemni, thank you very much. We'll be coming back to you shortly. Brother Farooq, another article which you were looking at earlier was quite an important one. I think it was, what was it again,
yes,
Roger Cohen?
Let's have two tweets before that.
Oh,
We've just got tweets in the last couple of minutes. One from A. Sayyid, who says, we never hear or read in media about other people. Why just Muslims? And Mariam Summers says that, yes, as much as they can, media does not know half the truth about Islam. They distort it to make fun of Islam and Muslims. The first tweet was from A. Sayyid. Now let's move on to the next article we're looking at is on the New York Times from a gentleman called Roger Cohen. And it reads as follows, Islam and the West at war. And that's exactly what this article is saying. And it's pretty, a lot of the paragraphs in the article are pretty disturbing, to be honest, to say the least. I'll just pick one up for a start. This person says, Roger Cohen, that history, I suspect, will not judge Obama kindly for having failed to foster the great liberation movement that rose up in Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Syria and elsewhere. Inaction is also policy. Non-intervention produced Syria today. Amongst many other things, he's saying that perhaps in his view that America hasn't done enough to intervene in Syrian internal problems, and therefore we've seen, and also with Arab Spring. Do you think he's slightly aloof from the reality?
No, I think, in fact, what America did under Bush was to create the chaos that Obama had to come and sort out. And if he had gone with the same interventionist policies as Mr. Bush, then I think we would have seen further chaos in this world.
Yes.
You know, the Arab Spring was something different. I mean, that was something that the West was trying to introduce democracies into autocratic regimes.
Yes.
And what they did not take into account, that you cannot just impose democracy in this way.
Yeah.
There has to be a period of time where it's introduced properly. And when you try and impose it, you create chaos. We've seen in Libya, we've seen in Egypt, and we've seen in Syria.
That's right.
Total chaos. And it is really the policies of the West that's led to this.
That's right.
And it will continue until the West stops meddling in other people's affairs.
That's right. So we have also Dr. Sorry, yeah.
Just put a quick quote to you, to Amir, because this was something I found very challenging about this article. This is Roger Cohen writing an article, New York Times, major newspaper within the US, one of the leading newspapers globally as well. He says this, quite a long quote, Islam is a religion that has spawned multifaceted political movements whose goal is power. Islam as such is fair game for commentators, caricaturists and cartoonists whose inclination to mock the depredations of political Islam's cynical uses of the Prophet cannot be cowed by fear. It's a little bit hard to understand that sentence, to be honest, but I think what he's saying is that Islam has spawned political movements of power, and as a result it's fair game to be mocked by cartoonists. What do you think?
Well, the thing is that, unfortunately, it was foretold that there will be a time in the future when Islam will create this many different sects. And that was the time when the promised reformer would come. And therefore, perhaps in one way, this is proof that the promised reformer was required. And this is why God sent promised Messiah Islam to try and reform what Islam had done. Now, we, by the grace of Allah, have Khilafat. And through the institution of Khilafat, we are trying to create peace in this society. And the other Muslims, they have to take note, because they still, in some areas, propagate hate. They hate against kafirs, and everyone now is becoming a kafir. And that is a disbeliever. That's right, infidel. And that is the thing that is creating the hate in society. And until we stop doing that, until the Muslim Ummah also take note of it and start bringing the true teachings of Islam to the forefront, we will continue to see disorder in society, especially in the Muslim countries.
So a very strong message to counter this type of thinking then. I think we also have Asif Khan Sahib from Canada. Asif Khan Sahib, pardon me, Asif Khan. So Asif Khan, you're from Canada, you're the spokesperson from Canada. Welcome to the show. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Jazakallah for having Canada Jamaat on the program today. It's our blessing.
So you're close to New York, so you're close enough for me to use New York Times in relation to you, if you don't mind. So again, we're looking at this article which has been written by Roger Cohen, and he's made a number of comments about Islam within this article. And particularly, as we just mentioned, he describes it as an abuse of power, but also he responds to a comment which has recently been suggested that politicians have said this is not a war between Islam and the West, but this is a war between the West and Islamism, or it's a war between the West and terrorism. I don't want to put words into his mouth. I don't want to say that he's saying this, but it seems to me that from this article and many other articles, they're saying, no, it isn't. It's really a war between Islam and the West, and that Islam, to quote Sam Harris recently on the Bill Maher show, Islam is the motherlode of bad ideas. And this is Islam. It's not the extremists, it's Islam that's to blame. What do you think?
Just like Amir Saab UK Saab had mentioned, this is mischief on part of the media. If you, just do Google searches on moderate Muslims in the media, or if you do a Google search on extreme Muslims in the media, you're going to get a lot more hits when it comes to the extreme views. It's unfortunate, but this is what seems to sell newspapers. This is what seems to increase click ratios. It's the sensationalism of trying to tie extremism to Islam. It's what's selling papers, selling headlines.
So you feel that it's the media that is looking to manipulate it in a sense. But then they might say to you in response, well, from another one of the articles that we have here, we see that 8% of the American population, the Muslim population in America, think that suicide bombing is justified. So if you have 100 American Muslims in the room, 8 of those Muslims would believe suicide bombing is justified. And they say this is the problem lies with Islam. It's not the media, it's Islam. What would you say?
Well, I think that stat is rather skewed, because I'm pretty sure any of us could do a survey of Muslims in America, Canada, UK, Germany, and we would never get anything as high as 8%. There are that faction of the Islamic community that have extremist views, as Amir Saab had mentioned, and it needs to be rooted out. And as our beloved Hazur has mentioned, our law authorities, our government officials need to have the available resources to seek these individuals out and end their views.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Khan. I'm going to go to you just across the border to America now to deal with some of these issues in the US as well. So, Jazakallah for joining us. Assalamu alaikum to Mr. Fahim Yunus. Are you online with us? Okay, now we're going to cross over the Atlantic to France. Asif Arif, are you with us?
Assalamu alaikum, Jonathan.
Wa alaikum salam rahmatullah.
Thank you for having me.
Out of all of the guests today, then tragedy is most at home within your country. You've recently had the Charlie Hebdo attacks, and is very strong in the consciousness of the French people. What would you say from a French perspective? People are saying, "Je suis Charlie," "We are Charlie," and they're putting this forwards, and they're saying that this is a response to Islam. But it's been a few weeks since the French attacks. What's the atmosphere like in France today in relation to anti-Islamic sentiments?
Yeah, well, there is some, obviously there is some anti-Islamic sentiment around France. And I would like to mention the article of what Farooq has mentioned before about two personalities in France, and which made a very huge, they are the bestsellers because they write two books. It's Éric Zemmour and Michel Houellebecq. Éric Zemmour is a very well-known polemist in France. He wrote the Suicide Français, which means the French suicide. And in this book, he criticized Islam, and Michel Houellebecq has wrote Submission, which is another book who criticizes, he's painting a French society in 7 years, in which it will be two political parties will be fights, one against each other. The extremist party of Le Pen, as Amisab has mentioned it before, and on the other side it will be a Muslim Brotherhood political party, Islamist political party. And these two books have made a lot of have triggered a lot of criticism by every people in the French society, which could be really good in some way, because if they are criticizing, that means they are saying that this is not Islam, because the way that Islam is painting in these books is, of course, Islam is a religion who submit women, Islam is a religion of intolerance, Islam, and of course, the Muslim community France respond to that attacks against against Islam and against actually these attacks are made by people in the name of Islam, but actually this is not Islam. As Amir Sabah said, this is the people who are serving women and all that. These people are extremists, and they are not at all related to Islam. Well, the sentiment is going further and further intolerant.
Austin, I'm sorry to jump in. Yes. Just a quick question. So, I mean, in relation to what you're saying, that there's a strong conversation within France about the tensions between Islam and French society. To give just a few examples, last year we know, this is from an article in the Japan Times, and this was entitled "Charlie and the Anti-Muslim Media Factory, Sami Mahroum." So he himself is a Muslim, and he's putting a lot of blame on the media. But he cites some important examples, and he says last year the mayor of Sarge-le-Mans, a French town of 3,500 people with 180 Muslim students, sought to impose pork on all schools. He also says a couple of years earlier, the then French President Nicolas Sarkozy joined in a campaign to ban halal meat branding, which became an election issue. The mayor and President Sarkozy, they were elected, and they would aim to be representing the people, one of whom wants to ban pork, the other is looking to suggest that you should ban halal meat branding. Is this showing that there's a strong anti-Muslim sentiment within France, and the Muslims are losing the conversation to win the hearts and minds of the French people?
Yeah, exactly. Well, to taking the example of the former president of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, he gives a statement a few days ago, which is making a lot of noise still in France. It's about the veal. And he said, I am for the ban of the veal in general. And right now we are not talking about the ban of the covering the face, which is already in our laws in France. So it's not that Muslims are losing the power of conversation, because we are trying. I think there is some Muslim who are trying to get some conversation with the public authorities and tell them to not overlooked, all these issues about Islam, and to not come with it in media, because it makes it like it's a very big issue, and actually it can be solved on a very small level.
Yeah, just sum things up. I mean, you mentioned about Submission and La Suicide François, these two books which have come through, and Sarkozy's reaction as well. Do you think Europe can really afford this kind of friction, especially with the very xenophobic history Europe has seen, in a few words?
Yeah, well, it's exactly that. If we want to build a society which is based on peace, which is based on tolerance, we cannot afford these kind of books. And actually, in France, I think the biggest problem of Muslims, to conclude, is the need of leadership. And this leadership cannot be attained if we are not looking through the Khalifa of Islam, which is now Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Khamis, Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad. And what he says is very clear, and it could be applied to everyone. We need a society based on justice, based on peace, and for that, of course, these kind of books are not welcomed.
Tafar, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to now go to a video, and then in the third section, we're going to come back to some of the thoughts you mentioned about solutions and the Khalifa of Islam and what he's given as guidance. So, Brother Farooq, let's head to a VT now, and we'll come back and we'll discuss part 3.
Islamic principles and beliefs are seen with suspicion by many in the West. Recent incidents, such as the attacks in France and Australia, as well as previous attacks which took place in London and Madrid, have increased people's suspicion of the religion and the beliefs held by Muslims. A YouGov poll held in the UK revealed that less than 1 in 4 voters believed that Islam is compatible with the British way of life. Similar polls held in France revealed that 74% of people see Islam as an intolerant religion. We are now seeing groups leveraging this anti-Islamic sentiment to set up organizations such as Pegida in Germany, which are campaigning against the spread of what they see as an intolerant belief system in Europe. In addition to the negative perception generated by lone wolf-style attacks, both Muslims and non-Muslims are questioning whether the Islamic community in these countries is doing enough to promote the religion in its true form, as one of tolerance and respect, whilst also proving that they are capable of integrating within the communities in which they live. Whilst there is no doubt that Muslims are involved in many community projects and charity initiatives, are they doing enough to promote this good work? Is it fair to blame the media for allowing this negative perception of Islam to continue growing? And what should we, as Muslims, do to improve this perception?
Islam, thanks for coming back again. Let's go straight to now the solution of the problems. Of course, looking at some youth around the world who are really causing mayhem in the name of Islam. Look at this contrast. I mean, looking at swlondoner.co.uk, picture of Amir Sahib, yourself, and with you, the president of Ahmadi Muslim Communities Youth Association in the UK. They have, the title of the story is "Fantastic Young Muslims Honoured at Parliament Event for Raising 1.5 million for Charity." And they say that this year they raised £340,000 and they were given to 45 different beneficiaries in the UK as charities. So that's the word fantastic coming through for Ahmadi Muslim youth. Then again, looking at the Ahmadis in, for example, America, Texas, where they're actually defending Islam and also saying Stop the Crisis event. And it's called Stop the Crisis event, and talking about ISIS, how to stop radicalization and to promote true Islamic teachings. Going again across the board to America, same message coming through, to Canada, where in fact they're saying that Ahmadi Muslim group launched campaign to prevent youth radicalization, and it's happening, something called Stop Crisis, that is ISIS, and it's happening in Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, Brampton, Mississauga, Calgary, Saskatoon and Vancouver. This is an amazing community happening from east to west, the same message, consistent message of Islam. And to finish things off for the time being, Hazur's into Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad, the head of the Muslim community, the Caliph of Islam, the Khalifa of Islam. He was interviewed by Sheila Fogarty of LBC, leading UK's radio channel. Hazur said a few things which really have in the end put all the problems to rest and given solutions to problems. Amir Saab, I'll probably speak to you and seek your advice. What has Huzoor said? First of all, the interview is being telecast on MTA a number of times. What have you gained from the interview?
Well, firstly, I think Huzoor condemned the attacks that took place and said this was totally un-Islamic and should have never happened because it goes against the teaching of Islam. Then Huzoor talked about the love of one's country. Everyone, every citizen should be supporting their country, and there's a proper way of doing these things. And he said that yes, from time to time, you may disagree with your leaders, but the way is to use the democratic process to go and you go and speak to your members of parliament or your other leaders in society and get them to put your view forward and bring change from within rather than trying to use weapons. Then Huzoor mentioned that one of the problems that Islam finds is lack of leadership. Unless the Muslims have a strong leader who can give them direction, at this moment we have a lot of desperate groups who have no direction. They don't know how to do it. But you can see that although Ahmadi is a small community, why is it that our Khalifa is able to go and address Congress, is able to go and address the European Parliament, the British parliaments, and parliaments around the world? And when Huzoor went to the European Parliament, one of the things the High Commissioner or the Foreign Secretary of Pakistan was there at the same time. Yeah. And a lot of the MEPs who were supposed to meet with her cancelled their appointments and came to listen to Huzoor's address. And one of the officials said, what is it about your community? You're a small community. And yet, when our President Zardari wants to come and meet with President Schultz, he says, it's difficult to fit in my diary. And your Khalifa comes, and the President comes himself to listen to his. So I think this is the thing that in the West, there's now recognition that if peace is going to be found, it is through Khilafat. And it was through the Ahmadiyya Khilafat. And there is no other way, because the rest of the Muslim world at the moment is torn apart with strife. They have no leadership, they don't know. And the thing is that they're not following true Islam. That is the other major issue. Because you see in Saudi Arabia, for instance, women have no rights there. They cannot drive a car, they cannot go out anywhere. And yet, if you look at the time of the Holy Prophet Muhammad Hazrat Khadija was a businesswoman. Huge contrast from where that was. And in fact, she, and you look at Hazrat Aisha, look at the women during that period, they were role models. Yes. And yet what is happening in Saudi Arabia is totally contrary to that. Complete contrast.
Amir Saab, I also wanted to ask you, we saw the photo of yourself in Parliament with Mir Waqas Ahmed, the head of the youth element or youth movement within the UK, raising 1.5 million for charity. Is that what sort of impact could that have, do you think, on changing the conversation around Islam within the nation? Because do you think that in fact many people are properly aware of just how much the Muslim youth, or particularly the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, are contributing to society, and what sort of an impact have you found this has on British life and British responses to you and to your community?
You see, one of the things that a lot of people ask is, how do you bring about change? And what do you mean by loyalty to one's country? What better way can it be that our Khuddam go, and Lajna as well, and Ansar, go out there and raise monies for charity, British charities, ladies and the gents. And they contributed to almost 40 charities in that particular event. And this, and apart from that, our Khuddam and Lajna are going and planting trees. Their blood donation, campaigns taking place. So they're cleaning the streets. There's a whole range of things happening. And that is the best way to engage youngsters and give them an identity. Part of the problem that the Muslims are facing is they have lost their identity. They do not know what they stand for anymore. And it is that loss of identity which is causing even very young, educated Muslims to go astray.
And when we do these sort of things,
when you do these things, it gives them a purpose and identity and pride in their faith.
And their faith, so they can properly understand Islam, stand up tall, and be proud young Muslims, and that's the way
And the thing is that we are very fortunate that we have Khilafat. And Khalifa al-Masih continues each week to address the community and guide us in the right direction, so that wherever he sees that the Jamaat is not performing correctly, he guides us in the correct direction. And this is one thing that the whole of the Muslim world lacks. And until they understand that the promised reformer has come, and that change will only take place when they come under his umbrella. And until that happens, I'm sorry to say that we may continue to see more strife before we see change. But lastly, the Muslim world has to become transparent. They have to accept that the responsibility lies with them. It's no good always blaming the West for everything. Yes, the media is against us. Yes, all of those things. But have we brought change? And this is where Hazur is guided, have transparency, open up.
Honestly and live by transparency. Thank you, Misa. To quickly, let's go overseas as well, because I think this connects very nicely with a lot of the themes that are being done in particularly, let's say, the USA. So should we go to Fahim Yunus? Brother Farooq, what would you have to say to Fahim Sahib? We've seen in Texas they're doing Stop the Crisis. What do you think about that? What would you say?
I think simply ask the same question again. I think under the leadership of Khilafat, Mr. Yunus, what do you think is being done in America? Is it any different to what we're doing in the UK? And how is it so uniform, consistent message across the board and going across Atlantic and seeing that the youth in your country are doing the same things here? What is so special about this community?
That's very true. And you answered the question. There cannot be anything different here in America, because it's always, this is a battle between 72 and 1. About 50 years ago, the Muslim world was very proud that they're the 72 and we are the 1. And today in America, we're doing exactly what Hazur is saying, what you are doing in UK, what Canada is doing. Look at Press Point today, Jonathan and my other friend. You have united UK, France, Germany, Canada, and US under one banner. It's that one, it's the power of oneness which Islam needs today. That is why we have that one Khilafat. And I think there will never be any difference of strategy between any of the countries of Jamaats, and that is the beauty of this Jamaat. And inshallah ta'ala, as they say, it's darkest before the dawn. Yes, it's getting dark now, but inshallah ta'ala, the dawn of Ahmadiyyat will shine very bright very soon.
This is how you're looking to combat the very strong fears within the USA that in fact extremism is on the rise and Islam is to blame. Let me connect you now, Ms. Yunus, with Amir Sab in Germany. Do we still have you online? No problem at all. So we don't have Amir Sab Germany online now. But I think we can go to France. Let's go to Asif Arif. Brother Asif, France is facing a very difficult time. You're coming from Charlie Hebdo, selling a minimal number of papers. I think it was around 60,000. The most recent Survivor edition spiked and has increased hugely in the number of sales that have gone on board. People say, "Je suis Charlie, I am Charlie," and has almost become part of French identity, God forbid, to support the nature of the cartoons in France. How can we offer a solution in France? These would be our closing remarks. What are your thoughts on how we can bring about change in France and around the world? What are you doing, and how can we do that? Brother Asif, are you with us? Okay. So to combat extremism, we need our speakers online, but we don't worry, because we have the Emir of the UK community. We're going to come back home, and it's always best to come home. So, Mr. Hayat, how would you wrap this up? You've talked about the Caliph of Islam. You've talked about the guidance he's given. Do you think that it's starting to resonate within British culture, within British politicians, within British media? Do you think positive signs are being shown?
I think the only way we're going to be able to fight, it has to be done at different levels. One, we have within the Muslim community, we have to bring about change. There are still Muslims who come on television and still talk about, wajib al-qatl, and until they stop this, until they stop promoting the message of hate. We've seen what is happening in Pakistan.
Is people are legitimate to be killed.
That's right.
Ahmadi Muslims, you can kill them just because they're Ahmadi Muslims.
Absolutely.
Right.
And we've seen that the destruction it is causing in Pakistan and other parts of the Muslim world. Until they bring about change, I think we will not be able to bring change and peace in this country. Secondly, is the media. We have to work closely with the media. We have social media. So use the social media to promote the true message of Islam to people of this country. Through Khilafat, I think we can bring about change in this world.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hayat. So, Brother Farooq, it's been it's been full of information, been full of news. I hope our viewers at home have benefited from it. But I think particularly for the viewers at home, engage in this online conversation. You can see that a lot of articles are being posted online which are very strongly against Islam. If you yourself are a Muslim, or if you yourself feel that in fact Islam is not about hatred, is not about extremism, but is about peace and it's about justice, it's about beauty, then why not engage in that debate? This is the humble effort of those in the studio to do that, but you online, you can also engage in that conversation. So hopefully that can also be part of the solution, that those at home and those around the world can also begin to inform that conversation a little bit more, and God willing, we can have truth come out in the midst of this debate. So thank you very much for joining us. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you, and we hope to see all of our viewers next month for episode 23 of Presspoint. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Has launched the campaign to try and counter the extremists.
Now speaking out to denounce terror and extremism.
30,000 people formed a human chain in the south this afternoon in the name of peace.
We're asking if religious intolerance is on the rise.
We believe that religious freedom is a fundamental human right.
Giving a message that Islam is a religion of peace.
We must all endeavor to spread love and a sense of community.